Hey everybody, Jan Rutherford here with Self-Reliant Leadership. Hope you're doing great. And I do not have a guest. I'm not sure what happened to Donnie, but we are going to proceed anyway with the subject at hand. And what we titled this was Career Chapter 2, The Quest for Purpose and Meaning. And I wanted to talk about a lot of the people that I help that are transitioning in any way, shape, or form. And before I get going, I would love to hear who all is on the line. So if you could just let me know in the chat where you're calling in from and where you're listening from. And if you have any questions at all, I'd love to hear them. And again, what we're going to talk about is chapter 2, the quest for purpose and meaning. So again, just go ahead and let me know where you're calling in from. That would be fantastic. And if Donnie is able to join us, we'll bring him into the feed. But what I wanted to do was really talk about chapter 2 and the fact that as an executive coach, almost everybody that I'm working with is dealing with something. They're in a transition of some sort, in some way, shape, or form. And again, I'm seeing some folks calling in. Greg Sturdivant in Tampa and Jacqueline Fuller in Connecticut. Thank you guys. So again, as I was saying, everybody's dealing with something. Everybody's in the form of a transition. And oftentimes I'll have people that'll call me and one of the first things I ask is, what do you want? What do you want? And you think that might be a really, really simple question, but it's difficult. And a lot of times people haven't figured out what they want. So we start with values, real simple exercise, a simple but hard exercise. And we'll say, what is it that you hold dear? Of all the things that you value, what is most important? We look at finances. We look at fitness and health. We look at, for some people, faith or spirituality. We look at fulfillment, which comes in a career perspective. We look at all those different things. And what we try to do is help people understand, hey, if you have these values, the things you hold dear, prioritized, it's going to make the big decisions in life a heck of a lot easier. And often people will say, I've got them prioritized. And then I'll hear things like, yeah, well, if this offer comes in and it's more money, I'm going to take it. Like, okay, so nothing wrong with that. But you just said money is really important. Oh, before you were saying money wasn't important. I'm confused. And I think oftentimes we don't know what we hold dear. We don't stick to it. And we often are opportunistic. We'll put things out there and say, hey, if this happens, that's great. If that happens, that's great. But oftentimes we're not very intentional about what chapter 2 might really look like. And what I would also contend is most of us are not going to be just in a chapter 2. We're going to be in a chapter 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6 in our career. We're going to have a lot of different chapters. And every time that we change the narrative, we change our story. And one thing I know from reading Authentic Leadership by Bill George, and he studied all these leaders, he found the only thing that made leaders really differently year to year is that they were constantly testing themselves and reframing their life story. That's what they did. So one more point, and then I want to get into some questions. I see some coming in, and again, I really appreciate that. I was talking to my son today about, military veterans transitioning specifically. And I said, here's a mistake I see both with transitioning veterans and people that are looking to network to try to find and uncover new possibilities. What they do is they go out as a salesperson. Here's my resume. Here's all my accomplishments. Me. Here's what I want. And oftentimes it's rainbows and unicorns. I want a high-paying job. I want to be able to leave at 3 o'clock to go coach my kids. I want a job that's fulfilling, that does all this. I mean, they want everything. And it's crazy because an employer basically wants somebody that's going to work their tail off and produce value. That's what they want. They don't really care about what you did in the past. What are you going to do for me in the future? And what I think we need to see from a networking perspective is people that are out there that are curious, that they're not all about, hey, here's my resume, here's what I want to do, but hey, what are you grappling with? What was the toughest thing when you transitioned from one career to another? What are the challenges you're facing? What are you hearing from the circle that you hang in? Who do you think I should be talking to? I hardly ever, whenever someone's trying to network with me, I almost never hear anyone that says, Jan, I hate to bug you, but if I could, I got like 5 questions. I'd just love to ask you 5 questions. Here's my working hypothesis on what I think is going on out there. Let me go to one point here. This is from Lawrence Sullivan. Took years for me to figure out a career that enables is what is important instead of confusing the means for the ends. And Lawrence, I'd love to hear more about that. But, as I read that, I think of the times when I have taken a job for money. It's like, there's a lot of yellow flags here, but the money's really good. And, given that money wasn't the most important thing I valued, it always came back to bite me, because the things that I valued was being in a place that had purpose and meaning, where people were trustworthy and loyal and attempting to be selfless. I mean, that is what I was always looking for, and oftentimes, came up short. So again, if I'm hitting on some things, let me know. And if you've got any questions, just throw them in there. But let me kind of walk you through a couple other things on this chapter 2. I've talked a little bit about how important networking is and figuring that out. The other thing some of you might know that I do is I lead expeditions with transitioning military veterans and executives who need a digital detox. And we go out for 4 days and 3 nights, usually in places like Colorado. And the whole idea isn't to teach people about wilderness or rock climbing or anything. It's just to be in a really great environment with really great people who have done great things in their lives and want to continue to do great things. And what always comes out of that is, gosh, I got to slow down to speed up. My life is just too busy, too fast, too crazy. And they realize that, nothing really happened that their team couldn't take care of while they were out. When they come back and they start checking messages, they're like, oh, there's a problem on Friday and it's Monday and that problem resolved itself. Huh? Isn't that interesting? We all of us oftentimes confuse, results and fulfillment with activity. We're so busy, and we don't take the time to step back. I'm a big advocate of journaling and taking some time to reflect and figure out what's really important. We on the leadership podcast that we've been running for 5 years, we've had almost 300 guests, really interesting people. I mean, a lot of the books on that bookshelf are written by authors that we've had the good fortune of interviewing. And there's 3 things that really stand out about these, what you'd call uber successful people. One, they really understand time. They know how to manage time. They know what activities produce the most value, and they guard time like crazy. And with that, there's a certain amount of self-discipline that they have and a certain amount of sacrifice. And by sacrifice, I mean they realize they can't do everything that they want, and they have to say no to a lot of things. The second thing that they do is they're all really, really curious. They are constantly looking for patterns, constantly trying to figure out how things work. Whether we've interviewed somebody that's been managing people for 20 plus years and has 75,000 people in their organization, they're still trying to figure out what makes a leader, what makes people tick. The other thing that always comes out is when dealing with other people, that there's a sense that there's a lot of tribalism, in our communities and our organizations and in our countries, that there's a lot of us and them. And I think the most influential people are the ones that can really step outside that and be open-minded. And hey, great news! I've got Donnie has joined us, and let me bring him in. Donnie, I started without you, my friend.
I apologize, Jan. I switched something on the schedule, and then I looked down. I'm like, I appreciate you covering for me. So, not the best intro to be late to the webinar. So, apologize.
No worries. Your sound's a little bit low, but we can hear you, and I'm glad to have you here. And rather than me try to read your bio, go ahead and introduce yourself to our audience, if you would.
Yeah, sure, Jan, thanks. I'm Donnie Hasseltine. I am currently the Chief Security Officer of Xenon Partners, which is a small private equity firm that does focus on business-to-business software as a service companies. Prior to that, I spent 22 years in the U.S. Marine Corps as an infantry and reconnaissance officer, and retired in 2019, and then moved out here. So as you'd expect from a Marine career, kind of lived all over the United States, traveled all over the world, and then eventually kind of settled into Northern California. And now kind of have shifted from infantry to tech. So pretty broad career pivot, which I think is kind of what we're getting at today.
Right. Well, and again, thanks for your years of service and sacrifice. I appreciate that. I know you've taken a bold stand in lots of cases, and I wanted to dig into some of those. But again, you've been out 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
You were in 22. Where you went to college was very military, the Virginia Military Institute. So, in the big scheme of things, you've really been in the military. You were in the military 26 years, your whole entire adult life.
True. Yeah.
So, and now you've been out 2 years. So you started your career, actually, I mean, you're in your 40s when you started chapter 2.
Right. That's right. Yeah.
So you're at that point where you're leaving the military. It's not like you're going to go be an entry-level salesperson or entry-level manufacturing management and start from the bottom up. That's not acceptable. At the same time, you don't have any business experience. You don't know how to generate revenue. Nobody's going to just give you the keys to the kingdom and say, well, you're a good leader in the military. You're going to be a great leader in this industry you know nothing about. So what was your, as you were getting out, what was your approach, and in hindsight, what did you get right and what did you completely miss the boat on?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the first thing I would try to say is if I look back across it, it looks like I had a pretty smooth transition, right? I had almost a perfect transition as from people looking outside in. And I can now go back, and we'll talk about this. And I could look back at the 17 or 18 doors I walked through to get to where I'm at now. But I think it's important to realize for people that are doing career pivots, especially military veterans transitioning, is look at door 4. I was terrified. I had no idea where door 5 was, right? So very easy to see in hindsight how I got there, but it's important to realize, I think sometimes people tell you this is all the things I did, and you're like, oh my gosh, how could I do all those things? The point is at every step, you literally have no idea what the next step is. So I think that, maybe just going a little ways back, right? When I was at the point where I was making the decision, should I get out? Should I stay in? I think the first thing I tell people to do is, before you make that jump, keep as many doors open as you can, right? Don't close the door until you have to. And the second thing is, I think that, it's almost cliche at this point to say, hey, find what makes you happy. That's what you should be looking at. And I really love the advice of Joseph Campbell, which is follow your bliss. But I think there's also reality there is my bliss may not get me the salary I need for my family to live in the Bay Area, right? So, I mean, there's some practicalities that are mixed in there. And I think that for veterans who have been very focused on the sense of purpose they get in the military and the time they spend in and the mission focus, they don't really know what's out there. They have a very narrow view of what's out there. So the thing I would say is follow your curiosity, right? And I think that was the first step. Follow your curiosity and invest in yourself. So what that looked like for me is I was at a point I might get out, I might not, I'm not sure. And I started thinking about, I was in Silicon Valley, I was stationed up here I started seeing some of the tech stuff, and I said, okay, well, this is super interesting to me. It's something I know nothing about. And what I eventually settled on was the fact that, look, I can order anything I want in the world on Amazon.com, but I have no idea what happens when I click that button, right? Like none whatsoever. So
Right.
I wanted to find out more about that. And as I dug into it, I started looking at the career of cybersecurity. I saw a great program at Brown University that I was able to do while I was on active duty. And so I kind of made a jump for that, invested a lot of my own money, used the GI Bill, used what I could to do this. But the thought process again wasn't like it wasn't a pivot yet. It was like it was a hedging a bet, right? Because I could stay in and be a grunt who understood cyber, which is a pretty rare and needed in the military, or I'd be getting out in Silicon Valley, not like you said, like a military officer with a history degree, but someone with a cybersecurity degree, which again gets you a little bit further down the line. And I think that to your overall point, I think the thing that's important is we often think, hey, I was an operations officer in the military, I could be a COO. Outside of operations being the title, they're very different things. And 2.5, 3 years ago, I would have said, of course I could be a COO. Having now been a COO of a company, I realized how wildly different it actually was. And it's important to realize that when you shift in industries, that people look at experience first in that industry vertical, and then certifications and education. And if you don't have that experience, it's a long stretch because you're competing against someone that has it, and you've got to kind of balance that piece. And we'll get in this a little bit later, I think. But the way you bridge that gap really is building relationships and networking, which is another piece of that pivot piece. So I know that was a lot, so I'll
No,
pause there.
no, that's great. What surprised you? What was like, oh, I didn't know what I didn't know?
Yeah, I mean, it was a number of things. I mean, there's in our world at Xenon Partners, it's a very specific niche world of B2B SaaS. So, as an example, like I have military folks who get an MBA, right? So they understand the basics of how business works. But in the SaaS world, we calculate revenue completely differently than the standard business world, right? So it was a piece of the first couple calls I had on one. It was almost speaking a different language. Like I had no idea what they were talking about.
Yeah.
And I ended up finding like these little PDFs, like with glossaries of terms. And my first few calls when I started that, I literally had a monitor that had these things taped all around it. So when people started talking, I could kind of try to look and see what they were talking about. And so, as an example, like one very tangible example, right? In business, it's critical that you understand how revenue works. It's critical that you understand how you get and bring revenue in. And that's not really an issue in the military, right? There's budget and you have to balance your budget. But usually in the military, it's like, here's your mission and here's how much money you have. And like, you have to connect the dots on that. That's not an easy task, right? But the problem in business is you step out, right? It's like, you got to decide what you're going to spend on that mission and why you want that mission. And you also have to get the money to come into the budget in the first place. And so, like in the SaaS world, we are very focused on really two things, right? LTV, which is lifetime value, and CAC, which is cost to acquire a customer. So if you don't understand those two things, you literally have no ability to bring anything to the table, right? Like how much money, the dollar amount, does it cost you to get a customer to sign up? And in the time they're using your service, how much money do you generate before they leave and do something different, right? And as long as you maintain your cost to acquire a customer below your LTV, like the revenue is going to keep going in the right direction. But understanding those relationships, and they're fairly simple concepts, but then seeing them in practice is a pretty significant paradigm shift from what you see in the military.
Yeah, it's music to my ears. When you're talking lifetime value of a customer, to really understand that and what it costs to acquire a customer. I was talking before you came on how I don't see a lot of people that are curious that that are transitioning. They'll say that even ask a question like, "Hey, let me ask a really dumb question. How do you guys make money?" Tell me, show me. Tell me how the dollar flows into the organization. How's that work? Or a question like, hey, I'm sure you all are struggling with what business you're in and what business you're not in. Talk to me about that struggle, that ongoing question, or how do you interpret what's going on in the marketplace into things that you want to incorporate into your strategy? I never, ever get those questions.
Yeah.
right? What I get is, here is my resume. Here is what I've done. Let me just give you my background, because that'll be really helpful, because I'm sure you really want to hear my background. Um, Instead of, what are your clients struggling with? What do you think they need in somebody? Talk to me about people that have successfully transitioned from one career to another at 45, 50 years old.
Yeah, Jen, I think you're hitting exactly the right things. I'll tell you a quick anecdote of a good friend of mine who went to law school late in life, and he's a phenomenal lawyer, but at the same time at law school, he wasn't trying to like knock it out of the park. He was trying to learn and move on. And he had a good time doing it. But at the time, when internships came around, there was a big law firm in the state he was studying, and they traditionally only took like the number one or number two person in the class, right? And he was probably in the middle. But he got an interview and he walked in, and they kind of go in and they start asking the questions. Like, well, hey, do you mind if I ask you a question? And they're like, well, yeah, sure. It's like, what resources do you give me as a member of your law firm to go find clients and bring them in?
Hmm.
Right. And he just, because he had seen some business stuff before, and started asking him, like, how do you generate business? It's like, I know I'm going to learn law. That's fine. Like, that'll come. That's research. But like, this is a business, right? And he got the internship, right?
Yep.
Because he was the only kid who wasn't saying like, well, I got straight A's in law school. He's
Yep.
like, how do you make money? And I think that the one piece of advice that I also give to people transitioning is like, look, you don't have to be an expert in everything. They don't, first of all, they don't think you're an expert. So like, be the dumb guy asking the dumb questions, and like, you will learn. And what I tell folks is like, if you connect with people in the industry, you start reading the blogs of the industry, you'll start getting a sense of the vocabulary. And what I found is when I went to like to meetings of professionals in the Bay Area, I would just ask a question like that, right? Like, hey, what's your CAC in LTV, and like, how do you balance that? The first time I asked that question, I still had really no idea that relationship. I didn't understand it. But they immediately think like you know more than than you do, and they start talking, and you'll understand about 20% of what they said. Then you go home and you Google it and you read some more, and the next time you ask a slightly more intelligent question. And I think as you network to figure out where that niche is that you want to go, start using the vocabulary, even if you don't understand it. If you make a
Yep.
mistake, learn from it and keep going on. But the odds are you're going to keep learning, right?
Yeah. Well, who's the queen of battle?
Well, the infantry and then the artillery says they're the king, right? So
The queen of battles. I mean, and for anybody listening, that's military transition, not just civilian transition. The queen of battle in the business world is the person that can generate revenue. I mean,
absolutely.
And it's like your friend that was an attorney realized that it's a business. And you know what? I mean, what attorneys really are salespeople. People that go into finance and accounting and banking, guess what? They're salespeople. Hey, you go to dental school, guess what? You're a salesperson. I mean, so much of the business world is sales. And, it's just a shame that profession gets such a rotten reputation because of, the used car salesman thing. But so much of business is exactly like what we're doing right now. It's two people talking, trying to figure out, where's the common ground? What are the issues are you dealing with? Can I help you? Can you help me? Let's do business. I mean, it's not this high pressure, thing that you see on TV and the movies. It's so misunderstood. And like you said, if all you've had to do is manage a budget by which you spend money, that's not the same as figuring out, here's this initiative is going to cost X. We've got to not only worry about the future, we've got to worry about the operations, the short-term yield and the long-term investment. We have to do both at the same time. It would be like being in the military worrying about collecting taxes.
That's a great analogy. Exactly. And I think that, one of the best pieces of advice I got from a Marine who transitioned, he runs a startup up here early on. He said, listen, there's only two jobs. There's people who build things and there are people who sell things. Like maybe you could say accountings, that people who count things, right? But really it's builders and sellers. He's like, CEO is a sales job. COO is a sales job. And I think like you're keep thinking about like you want to be a manager and leader, like then you're in sales. Like you can't say you're not in sales. Again, you may not want to be a sales development representative or account executive. That's fine. But if you're not building and coding, which you're probably not going to make that pivot late in life, right? You're in sales. And I think that's a key thing for veterans to understand. And I was on recruiting duty. I had done sales selling skills. So I understood that. I was like, I really don't want to do this cold calling stuff. Like, but what you said, Jan, it's about building relationships. It's, most of our customers, when I get on calls in the CEO role or CO role, it's exactly what you said. Like, what are your needs and what are your use cases? And sometimes it's saying like, look, I would love to sell you this product at $5,000 a month, but like, you don't need it. Right.
Yeah.
Or it's like you said, understanding the whole chain. Like we have times when customers come to us, it's like, well, we really need this feature. And our perspective is like we only build if there's revenue. So we're like, okay, well, how about this? You come on as an enterprise customer and we will deliver it by this time and we'll charge you when we deliver. Like if we can tie direct revenue to this, and the other day we had a feature came up and like the question was asked, like, how many people want it? These
Yeah.
7 people. How much are they paying each month? This amount. Okay, build it. How long is it going to take to build it? What's the development cost? And I think that's important to realize. It's like the next piece of it is like, it's not like deciding you need armor and deciding like, let's go build tanks tomorrow, right? I mean, that's the other piece of it is like, you're doing that entire ecosystem where in the military, you're kind of doing a narrow, very focused window on it.
Yeah. Well, let me kind of shift gears a little bit. Again, what we're talking about is, chapter 2, people making pivots. We know right now, 40% of people are actively looking for another job. And if they were happy, they wouldn't be looking if they were fulfilled. So there's a big impetus on leaders to make sure, they're not just paying people well, but they're creating an environment, that where people want to stay. I also think there's an obligation, people have as a personal responsibility to organizations, where they get to work. But again, for those of us that are, middle age, mid career, looking at major pivot from one to the next, I think most people, this is my assumption, are looking for deeper purpose and meaning. We know from Dan Pink's work on motivation that that's one of the 3 components: that, autonomy, and mastery. As you look at people, whether they're civilian or military, that are making, looking to make a big pivot, at the very beginning, before you came on, I started off and said, you've really got to know your values, what you hold dear. And if that's prioritized, that helps you make good decisions. What say you, again, when it comes to that, like you said, hey, I want a job with purpose and meaning, but I want to live in Silicon Valley. I can't do that if I don't make $350,000 a year. So do I have to sell my soul, or what does that mean? What advice do you have on that purpose and meaning? And again, and I'll leave it to you how much you want to get into it, but where you'll stand on principle on things.
Yeah, that's a good question, and that's really tough because that's a super introspective and generative question that you really have to ask yourself going forward. I mean, for me, what really attracted me to cybersecurity was that at its core, you're protecting people, right? So in a case where I'm the CISO, like I'm helping protect my company from getting attacked, and I'm helping protect their customers from losing their data, right? So to me, that was a very analogous kind of purpose to what I felt in the military. But I think that it's tough, right? Because there's some people who can make it work, and you can probably find a way to make it work, but you're gonna have to make some sacrifices. Kind of the military, it's like you have geo preference or billet preference, right? You got to pick one. You're gonna sacrifice the other. I think someone said the other day, you can have a great job, a great team, and a great duty station, but you can probably get 2 of the 3, but never 3 of the 3. So they're trade-offs. And one thing I would say too is like when I look at myself, like I am excited about the job, but like it's not everything you want it to be, right? And it never is going to be. That's one thing. So, and I think the one I also say is in the job search, you can probably more quickly find jobs and cultures that you don't want to be a part of faster than the one you want to be a part of, right? So I think that's important to realize for veterans is go out and talk to people. And even if it's a call, they're like, there's no way I'd ever want this job. Say, tell me more, ask about it, and then just know for sure, right? But when you talk about purpose, there's a lot of ways to get purpose, right? I mean, does the job allow you time with your family? So maybe the job doesn't fill your bucket completely, but it gives you the opportunity to be with your family, which does fill your bucket, right? Maybe it's you do things on the side, right? So for me, I've got family things. I'm involved with scouts and my kids. That really gets me excited. But I'm also on a board of advisors for 2 nonprofits. Like one that's really focused on national security issues, and one that's focused on taking care of former Marine reconnaissance members. So getting involved in those things, and I'm involved in another one actually that focuses on public-private partnerships with the FBI to kind of protect critical infrastructure. So that kind of aligns my job very much, but I get a piece of it. So maybe a case where you might not get the full pie, right? But you
Yep.
might get the job that gives you a portion of it, and the other
Yep.
things you do can eventually fill that up. So I think broadly in those terms.
I think that's really good counsel. I mean, it's kind of like buying a house. If your budget's, $750,000, you're probably not going to get 5 acres. And then you have to decide, are granite counters the most important thing? Or, I mean, you're not going to get everything on your list because there's always finite resources. And one of our resources is time.
Mm-hmm.
The one exception to that, might be if you're lucky enough and bold enough and again, lucky enough that you can find an entrepreneurial venture that checks a lot of those things, then I think you've got your best shot at it. But again, if stability is a really high value for you, entrepreneurship's not the way to go. I mean, because you don't know. If freedom is really high, like it is for me, that's really important. I mean, really important. Again, second chapter, a lot of times what we really want is to be around good dudes and good dudettes. We want to be around good people that we like and trust and respect. We get to that point where we say, no, no brilliant jerks. We don't want to work with brilliant jerks anymore.
Yeah.
So let me pop a question up here from Lawrence. He's been patiently waiting here. Let me throw this up here. What do you require from your employment to enable your lifestyle and happiness? A dollar amount, an identity, a purpose, access to health insurance? Good
Yeah,
question.
that's a great question. Sully, hello. It's been a while. Good to see you, man. Yeah, it goes a little bit what I'm talking about, right? Is I think for some people, they're very focused on that dollar amount, and it's like that's what they're chasing in life. But I think that it goes into like what you've got to know what makes you happy, and does your job allow you that? Maybe it gives you the finances and the vacation to go travel because that's important to you. But I think that the purpose is something you have to find, right? You can't expect a employer to give you that purpose. You have to find that purpose in your work and in your dedication. I think the identity is a really even more important question, right? Because I think that even in your initial pitch, you talked about like, hey, how do I identify what's next? What I'm doing it's really less about identifying where you're going and what you want to do. I think it's a little more self-discovery, right? Because I think that like when I'm in the military, my entire persona was really focused on being a Marine officer, right? My friends, everybody refocused and reflected that back at me. And I never had to step outside those mirrors and think about what it means to be on that. And when I was transitioning, I found myself reaching out to like high school friends actually quite a bit, being like, what do you remember about me in high school? Like just to ask those questions to remember, oh yeah, like the military is not 100% of who I am. It's become a big part of it. So what are those other parts of me that maybe I buried or forgotten about or not gotten into? And how do I pull those back out and kind of re-examine those pieces? Because there may be some gems of purpose there. And then once you have that, it's a little easier to go out and find a employer or a situation that allows you to do that, right? But again, to your point, you're not going to find 100%, but you could assemble 2 or 3 things where the employer gives you freedom to do something else on the side, and together you achieve that full picture.
Yeah. Well, great perspective. And I think Lawrence, I think you called him Sully, so obviously you know him. I mean, he asked a great question about identity. And again, whether you're military or civilian, oftentimes, especially for men, we identify ourselves by what we do. I mean, there's a lot of pride in that. And when we don't have that, I can relate. When I became an entrepreneur, I remember on day one, I went to some like conference, and one day I was with this pretty well-known company, and then the next day I go to this conference, and these 2 guys that are dressed way better than me are sitting there, and they're like, "Who you with?" And I'm like, Oh, like I'm with myself. I mean, it was like I didn't go, well, I'm Jan Rutherford. I'm the founder of Self-Reliant Leadership. I didn't
Yeah.
have a whole bunch of stuff behind me that I had that confidence and all that. And it was at that moment I'm like, oh man, like, oh, I've got to get that back. I got to get my swagger back.
Mhm.
And again, I think what you did, going out to friends and different people and trying to find out, where is this guy? I asked a guy the other day, Donnie, who'd probably been probably in more combat than just about anybody. I'm a special ops guy,
Mhm.
and he was in Somalia back when all the bad stuff happened there. And and it's a guy I love and respect. And I said, do you think that you'd still be the same person if you had only served during peacetime? You'd never been involved in all that stuff. And it was interesting. He said, you know what? I'm still the same person. He goes, what those experiences did, it gave me confidence. Not because I'm going to go replicate those experiences, but it gave me confidence that I can get through really bad stuff. That I know how I'm going to react. And it was interesting because I mean he's a sweet guy. I mean he really is. And if you met him, you never know the hell he's been through. And it's just interesting. And again, just because we're talking about someone who's in the military doesn't mean somebody out there hasn't been through their own stuff and trauma
Mhm.
and all kinds of stuff. We don't know looking at somebody, what they've been through and what they might be able to offer based on that in the second chapter, because one of the things that we have as we get older, we might lose our our reflexes and some of our cognitive abilities, but supposedly we get a little bit wiser. We've been there, done that, seen it. We've seen this person. They had a different name and a different face. We know how to deal with them. Or we've seen this pattern, and we can deal with it. Is that something that you're seeing? Again, now that you're developing competence, that you're able to, in some ways, even draw more on those experiences in the Marine
Yeah,
Corps.
absolutely. I mean, I think that look, I'd be lying if I didn't say that the transition was terrifying, right? And I would say that the first 2 years was a struggle because I had a great team and I had, I enjoyed working on the projects I was working on. I did feel like I had some purpose, but and I was getting paid well. Everything on paper looked good, but I think I had a deep sense of imposter syndrome. And I was struggling. I was saying
Mm,
like, okay,
yeah.
like what am I really bringing value to things? And there was a couple times like at reviews with the partners, I'm just like, do you guys think I'm actually helping here? Or am I just like, sometimes I feel like you're just paying me to hang out on calls. Like, and they're like, no, like, and they start, and that was helpful because they're like, look, think about this. Like, you're a great teammate, you're learning. We don't really expect you to be an expert in this in the first year anyway. Right. And I think that, it took me about 2 years, right, to get to the point where like, okay, I'm hitting my stride. I know what I'm in. I understand it, and being able to really synchronize those pieces. Because early on, like there would be a problem set, and be like, okay, I recognize this problem from the military, and be like, oh, it's kind of like this. But I was thinking in more military terms, right? So now I'm still calling on those experiences, but I'm describing it more in B2B SaaS terms, right?
Yeah.
But it's I'm still thinking of a solution, a problem that I wouldn't have thought of had I not had that military experience. But just I'm looking at a way that's going to fit better with the project. So you never want to forget or lose your experience. You want to draw on them. It's just, can you translate it to work effectively
Yeah.
in the environment you're in?
Even in reflecting on the vocabulary I hear my son use and you're using right now, it's funny. And this might be cyberspace, I don't know,
Mhm.
but problem set. In the world I come from, oh, you really don't want to call it a problem. It's an
Mhm.
issue, it's a challenge, it's an opportunity. But we don't usually call them problems or problem sets unless it's like
You're right, and I think that's me falling back. It's a perfect example of me falling back on in military terms, like problem framing this, because you're right.
well,
And in business, it's an opportunity. It's not.
yeah. Well, I mean, when I hear you guys,
Mhm.
you recent veterans talk about it's like, oh, problem set. It's like, and when I think of problem set, I think, oh, you know, you're. I'm afraid that you're gonna have biases come in. I'm afraid like your mind's not open enough.
Mhm.
Is that's my perspective when I hear problem set. It's like, oh, this is a set I define, instead of like, I have no idea if I even have all the right variables in here, and I'm even looking. I don't even know if I'm even close to on the right root cause. So kind of funny. Let me go to another one. It looks like Julene Ing. How long did it take for you to find your value purpose? Do you have a mentor to help you figure it out? And are you satisfied with where you are right now?
Yeah, those are great questions. So I'm you're probably not gonna like the answer, Julie, but here's what I'll say is like, I'm not sure I've found my value purpose yet, right? I think I'm still that's like a lifelong quest to me. I think the last thing about being satisfied, I mean, look, I'm content, but at the same time, I do find a part of me, it's always saying like, how can I expand? How can I do better? I can do this. I think there are people that I think find a value and purpose and get satisfied. They're like, I'm good with this. Like I have a friend who is about to retire and he's like, look, I'm going to go get a house off of Costa Rica and I'm going to surf. I'm completely happy. Right. And that sounds incredibly appealing to me, but I would last like 3 days on the beach and be like, I got to do something else. Right. I just knowing yourself, you've got to kind of think through this. The other piece you mentioned there is incredibly important, which is find a mentor. And I would absolutely encourage you to find multiple mentors, right? One of the great things I did in transition is I did the Commit Foundation, which is a military transition program. And one of the key things they do is they connect you with mentors. They connect you with very experienced business people who come in and they ask you kind of hard questions. I remember the first sit down I had, like, these two CEOs, they said, well, tell me about yourself. And I just kind of talked for a couple of minutes. And one of them looked at me and says, all I remember out of this is this and this. Is that what you want me to remember? I'm like, no. I'm like, okay, we'll go back and rethink about it and come try it again, right? So
I like it.
So I mean, like, I think that you've got to determine the value and purpose for you. That is a very personal question that you've got to determine. But the mentor is someone who helps hold up the mirror to you. Because if you're trying to think about it yourself, it's not that you're not capable of coming up with the answers. You just don't know what questions to ask, right? The mentor is a person who holds up the mirror and asks the questions that you're not willing to ask yourself or not able to formulate yourself, but they're not going to answer it for you, right? You have to answer. And I mean, I'll give you another crazy anecdote real quickly. And this is a little bit bizarre, but I have an uncle who was a monk who was in religious and cultural anthropology, and one time was moderating a chat with the Dalai Lama years and years ago, right?
Wow.
And in this room of people, one person stood up to ask the Dalai Lama a question and asked this incredibly long, detailed, I'm facing this and I have this challenge, I'm wrestling with this and I'm doing this. And it all boils down to it. And he's like, what should I do? And the Dalai Lama looked at him and says, like, I don't know. Next question. right. And the guy was just crestfallen, but it's like, in some ways it's so brilliant. Like, I can't tell you what to do, man. Like, I can help you ask questions. I can help prompt, but you have to answer that yourself.
Oh, that's funny.
So I really think you're right. Find a mentor, find a good one that's going to ask you the hard questions, but don't expect them to show you the way. That's for you to find out.
Now this one, now I know this guy. He's actually going on a crucible with us next year, and he's a active duty Marine Major, Pierce. Mm-hmm. And Donnie, any recommended reading and with somebody that I know is transitioning out?
Yeah, I mean, like I think that's a little bit, you want to be focused on a little bit, right? Because I would say that it depends on what you're looking to transition. If you're interested in transitioning to tech, I can give you a list. And feel free, connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm happy to take this conversation offline to anybody out here. What I found personally helpful is like the stuff that I like reading is like Joseph Campbell and mythology and thinking about that introspective stuff, because it makes me think about individual personal and psychological patterns that helps me kind of reconcile what's ahead of me and where I'm going. But on the blog stuff, I mean, like right now, I could give you just a list of cybersecurity stuff, blogs that I read and tech blogs, right? That may not be helpful to what you're looking at. What's important though, is if you start to narrow down to like an industry or something you're looking at, go read those blogs. And if you're bored to tears, you're not interested, move to another one, right? And keep reading and kind of using that curiosity to find something that you're like, wait, this is kind of cool. This is something that interests me. And that was the same way for me with cybersecurity. Is I began to see cybersecurity not as this impenetrable technical problem, but the fact that humans make computers and humans use computers. The problem in cybersecurity is not the computer, it's the humans. And like as a military guy, like I understand humans. I can do that, right? That doesn't mean you can't ignore the technical side to it, right? But it's finding where something kind of lines up with you, and then go down that point there. So
Yeah.
I hesitate to kind of give some broad blogs and stuff because I read a whole lot of stuff. But if you get me offline, say this is the kind of things I'm interested in, I'm happy to give you more specific recommendations.
We had Martin Dempsey, former chairman of the Joint Chiefs, on, and we asked him, what did he recommend for folks transitioning chapter 2, civilian or military? And he said something just profoundly simple. He said, hey, what you started your career, whether it was military or something, there's probably a good chance you were really passionate about it.
Yeah.
Don't forget that it's really hard to be successful in a place that you're not passionate and happy. So that's the first thing. The second thing I would add on to what you've said is, it's one thing I could sit in here all day long and try to figure out, chapter 2.
Yeah.
But at some point, you got to get out there.
Yep.
You got to get out there and you got to talk to people, because in sitting here, you might have a hypothesis about, I think this is chapter 2. This lines up with my values, my interests, all these things. And then you literally identify people that are somewhat in that field and talk to them. And literally interview them, and I can guarantee there's hardly anybody that won't give you 15 minutes.
Yeah, that's one of the best things I tell veterans. Like, look, as a veteran, you're never going to just see like a 3-star general walk down the street and says, "Hey, general, like we haven't met, but I'd love to get coffee this sometime and kind of pick your brain about something." Like that's just culturally we'd never do that, right? But if you cold call or email a CEO in the business world, I find that like they actually respond to you like 60% of the time. And maybe another 5 or 10% of the time, they're like, "Hey, look, I'm sorry. I just really don't have time." But find when you do that, and I agree with you completely, because in the entrepreneurship world, when you're doing startups, like you got to get out of the building. You've got to go test those hypotheses. You might say like, "I think I could do X." Go find someone in X and validate that, right? And the best way to do it is jump on LinkedIn. Go to a company or a job you're interested in, and then go to prior company and filter prior company and say like, U.S. Marine Corps. I used to do it all the time. I'd be like, you know what? I could go to, in 2 clicks, I could find out, say I was interested in Google. I could find out every former Marine who's within 20 miles of my house who works for Google. And I guarantee you email them like, "Hey, I'm a fellow Marine in the Bay Area. I'd like to hear what your experiences are." Like 100% of the time they'll answer you, right? So go find someone with your college, went like that in that business. And then you have a connection to them. It's not a completely cold email. And then ask those questions. And I'll go back and I will recommend one thing, especially for transition veterans. There's a book called Designing Your Life by a couple of Stanford business professors. And I would recommend looking at that. And the reason why is that's what the Commit Foundation uses. And they take the lean startup method and some of the design thinking stuff that's out there that we use in business. So reading is kind of interesting because they're using business terminology in this. But they have a lot of exercise in that book that make you kind of like go through these processes and help you. It kind of like spits out the stuff you're interested in, helps you identify like when you're super happy and focused and you're in the zone, what are you actually doing? Okay, can we break that apart and look at it? So that is probably worth, if you're really trying to figure out what the next chapter is, you don't know, that will help you narrow it down a little bit, I think. So yeah. I will throw that book out.
And Terrence Bennett, thank you again, who introduced you and I, said for veterans, start with veterati.com. And in the chat, I just put 2 authors to look up that have written really good books on transitioning. One is Lita Citron, and the other one, Scott Mann. And there's others out there. But
and Terrence and everyone else, I'm on Veterati too. You can find me there too if you want to sit down and talk in more detail.
And Donnie, I was thinking, the other thing is, you might be you could be a private in the 82nd Airborne Division, and you're getting out, and the person that was your commanding general, 2-star, who you could never have talked to when you were active duty, if they're retired, they will take your call. They would love to have your call, and you could call them and say, "Hey, General, I'm trying to do this. Who do you know?" Because you know what? If they were a general, they're connected. Mm-hmm. and and that's just the way it works out there. Pierce says thank you to you, Donnie. As we wrap up here, first off, I looked. It was my fault. I had one thing that said 950 for you, one thing that had 1050. So that's on me. That's
no worries. My apologies too.
But again, really glad to be on with you. I know you've demonstrated courage in the military. I know you've demonstrated courage over the last 2 years in some of the things that you stand for. And, for that, I want to recognize you and let you know I appreciate it. As we kind of wrap, Donnie, any last words of advice to the people listening, or even a challenge out to the people listening?
Yeah, I would say the advice I would say is just like, it's going to work out, but know that it's going to be rockier than you probably realize, but it's going to work out. Just stay the course, keep asking the questions, and go out there. And the challenge I would say is like, go out and meet some more people, right? I mean, like, I think I spoke to someone on Veterati not too long ago, and sat down and kind of walked their LinkedIn profile. It's like they had 50 connections and they were all military. I'm like, okay, so for the next month, I want you to get 5 new connections per week, and they cannot be active military, right? To force them to go out and just ask the questions. So that's the big challenge. Like, if you're interested in doing something, go find someone in that industry and have a 15 or 20-minute conversation with them. And finish that conversation with, who else can you introduce me to that I should talk to? And start building your network. Because, I mean, to be completely frank, like, I got my job through networking, because like a friend of mine who I knew, who had seen me before, is like, I know you don't have this experience that everyone would look for this job, but I know you can do it. I'm going to take a risk on you because I personally know you. So meet more people, engage. Don't be afraid to cold call people, because if they say no, what'd you lose? Like 30 seconds writing an email? Brush it off and move on, So I guess that's what I'd leave you with.
Yeah, and I would add, as someone who currently teaches MBA students, I would also add, especially for transitioning veterans, school can be, an MBA or can be a great thing, but what I would say is, why do you want to get that degree? I mean, to really answer that, because I think sometimes people just kick the can down the road. Mm-hmm. It's like, I'll go do that because then I don't have to make a decision on what I want.
Exactly right.
Or I would throw out that. And let me throw one last thing up here. Greg Sturdivant put something up here. This has been very helpful. Answering the question, what do I want to do, is probably the most difficult.
Completely
most important. Yeah, and that is it. I mean, that's what Greg, that's exactly what I ask CEOs every single day is, what do you want? And the sooner we can articulate, the sooner we can get on with things. And Don Inhen said, thanks for your perspective as well, Donnie. So
thanks, Donnie.
Yep, there you go. And again, thanks everybody for listening. Donnie, would love to have more discussions with you on
Absolutely.
This. And people can reach you on LinkedIn.
Please reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm happy to speak with any of you guys directly. Just shoot a message to me and look forward to it. And Jan, I would always be happy to talk to you again.
Yeah, and
I'll be on time next time.
Yeah, and hey, and the other thing, on November 11th, Veterans Day, I've got 4 senior NCOs that have successfully transitioned, and we're talking about them, because oftentimes the officers get the glory and everybody wants to hire a junior officer, but the senior NCOs are an untapped, great resource. So
completely agree.
We've got some really great, 4 really great NCOs, all with all kinds of combat experience. One was the first set of boots on the ground in Afghanistan in 2001, Silver Stars recipient, 2 Army Special Ops, and a Marine. So November 11th, make sure you tune in for that one. And Donnie, again, thank you for your time, for your service, for your family sacrifice, and modeling the way for people to successfully transition.
Thanks so much, Shannon. Thanks. Great to see everybody. Thanks so much.
All right. Bye-bye.